Our final speaker for today is the Rare Cancers Australia Chief Executive, Richard Vines. Most of you probably know Richard, but for those of you who don't, he studied maths and statistics at Melbourne Uni and trained as an actuary, but he moved into IT, and then he worked in software development and developing his own software company. Then he went to Europe to develop another software venture. Then he moved back to Australia, left IT and worked in not-for-profits. But then the really important part was in 2012, he and Kate established Rare Cancers Australia with the mission to improve the lives and outcomes for rare cancer patients, which you can definitely say they have done already. Throughout the day, we've heard some amazing success stories about genomics and technology and healthcare, as well as some of the challenges that we face. I'd like to welcome Richard to the stage to talk about what we must do to ensure Australia is ready for the genomics revolution.
Thank you. I was given a notebook at a recent conference from the Borneo Cultures Museum from Kuching in Sarawak, and it contains 2 pages of detailed notes, so we should be fine. I did intend when I started today to have a speech, but it's been rewritten about 5 times in my head, so we'll just see how we go. I am pleased to report that I have not been mistaken for a 16-year-old coming into Parliament House. In fact, I don't think I've been mistaken for a 60-year-old, but it's good. And I thought I'd just reflect for a moment on CanForum, because being here today, watching it being transmitted out to the, no doubt, millions of people that are out there watching, that it has come a long way from where it started, and there is a story about where it started. It started as something called the Sick or Treat Sessions, and the Sick or Treat was my personal piece of genius. It was obviously built around Halloween, and it was designed to be a play on Trick or Treat, and the Sick or Treat Sessions was meant to be a CanForum type thing that led into the Sick or Treat Ball. And after we tried that for a while, and someone very kindly pointed out to me, and Richard said, if you want sponsors, don't use the word sick. I thought, okay. So we decided then to move it to Canberra. And we couldn't make up our mind whether we were going to call it the Canberra Forum or the Cancer Forum. So we compromised and called it CanForum. But the story that I wanted to share with you is about the first one we ran, and we had a younger, slightly younger, more, what's the word? Better looking, version of David Thomas presenting, and he got up and he gave this wonderful talk on genomics and the future of genomics. And it is fascinating to think that in 2015 it was David's vision, and it was not the actuality. And it was prophetic, and we stand here, and I've been fortunate to be part of the Omico board and watch it go through its motions. I still think that, having sat through interminable finance, risk and audit committee meetings and various board meetings, that he owes me about a year of my life back. But notwithstanding that, it's a wonderful honour to have been part of it. But the funny thing about the day of the first Sick or Treat Sessions was that we also invited Professor Ian Fraser, notable research scientist, who also, without consultation, had decided to talk about genomics. And he stood up in a slightly grumbly voice and said, well, I was going to talk about genomics, but as David's done that, I'll now talk about something else. It's just absolutely hilarious. But the CanForum has become what I'd always hoped it was, a place where we could talk about ideas, where we could bring people together from all of the stakeholders in the cancer community: patients, patient advocates, industry, clinicians, scientists, researchers, because cancer belongs to all of us, and we're all touched by it. And when we were talking this morning about the impact that patients can make, David was talking about the impact that patients can make to their own treatment. I was reminded of something I said a long time ago, which is that a cancer diagnosis does not come with a lobotomy. And patients need to be respected. You can be anyone who lives through the system has got something to say. I always say that if you want to find out how to redesign your traffic system, ask a taxi driver. And I think sometimes patients are the taxi drivers of the health system, and we ignore them at our peril. So I also wanted to talk a little bit today about how we do advocacy, why today is so important, and why we actually wrote rarefication. And I should say I didn't write it. I just gave it a name, and I gave people like Christine and Plum and a few others a challenge. And what does Christine say? You turn up with these crazy ideas, and somehow they generally kind of work out at the end, after everyone else has had a nervous breakdown. And for these, we started. This is sort of the history of publications up until today, or up until a couple of weeks ago, where we launched the Counting Cost Supplemental. And what we've been doing all the time is trying to say to government, to industry, here is the problem and here is the solution. Not some shrill scream or shout for attention or what have you, but something that actually makes sense. And we started, and I'm delighted. I was thinking about this before, and Plum Stone, who largely wrote and controlled and refuses to take credit for, but rarefication is her, I was going to say opus dei, but I really meant to say magnum opus. But when I was messing around with spreadsheets trying to write the first report around the state of neglect of rare cancers, it was Plum who helped me to write the original Just a Little More Time report. And I tried really hard, I have to say, because when we launched that report, we had a choir in Parliament House who sang a song. And I was trying really hard to get a choir here today, but I think I got outvoted. But we did our best. And we presented the lack of investment in research, the lack of availability of treatments. We re-emphasised that in 2016. And then we went to Rare Solutions. In having been largely sort of ignored for a few years by government, we thought, well, perhaps we should tell them what to do, not just tell them there's a problem, but tell them what to do. So that became Rare Solutions, which was again contributed to by people who are still here, by Plum, Tiff Petrie, who's working with us in our Asia work now, a long history of people who've been involved. And the only thing notable about the two things notable about Rare Solutions. One is that Joe Hildebrand called it the shortest advocacy campaign he'd ever seen, because I started speaking I'm still looking up there nervously, started speaking here at just after 9 o'clock. Greg Hunt turned up at 9:15, announced that 20% of all MRFF funding would go to rare cancers and rare diseases, which was the beginning of Omico, and to some extent the Zero Cancer initiative. And then announce an inquiry into how we could just once and for all allow pharmaceutical companies to apply for pan-tumour reimbursement of therapies. 2017, he asked for that. And Andrew Wilson and the team at the PBAC did a pretty good job of doing it, of creating a report that was functional. And then we came up to an election, and it got buried, and it never re-emerged. We thought we would re-emerge it after the election, and then COVID came. And so now we're still having that conversation, and it's still the conversation that we need to get to. So for me, when I thought about this, and I thought about why we were doing all that, and why all of these reports built the story, what I wanted to do was to try and explain this, which are the hallmarks of cancer. And no, David, I'm not trying. And it was funny because I did an interview on ABC Radio this morning, and Raph Epstein said, well, what do you mean? And I I'm paraphrasing, but I said, well, as someone said earlier, cancer The number of different cancer types is equal to the number of cancer patients. And what you need to understand, it is a disease of us. It's a product of the genius of our evolution. It makes us, our brilliant success as organism makes us vulnerable. And a desperate pitch in the not wanting to waste airtime, I kind of said that, your chromosomes are connected to your RNA, which is connected to your DNA, which is connected to, and it all gets messed up. And I obviously said it better than that, because he said, well, I've just learned something. I thought, Christ. That's pretty good. But when we sort of got to this, and I thought, we can't come here and demand. We have to come here with a why. Why is cancer different? Why do we need to think about it differently? Why are we getting treatments that are coming to more and more diminishing patient populations? Why we can't tolerate that? Why we can't have them? We're going to hear from Prashant from MSD, but they have a drug called pembrolizumab, and it's registered for 30 indications in the US, and 12 of them are funded here. And that means that 18 people with 18 different types of cancer are not getting access in Australia unless they can afford it. And to go to Andrew's point about equity, there's nothing equitable about that. So I wanted to have a report that explained why. And that's what this report's about. And I wouldn't want it to be, we've talked a lot about genomics today, but there are other molecular elements of cancer that make it rare. It's about understanding the nature of this multiplicity of diseases, and then saying, well, how do we make it so that we protect our population? That's what this is really about. It's why did I, 2 weeks ago, have to go to a pharmaceutical company and say, mate, this is not where we want to be. We have a patient who's been on this drug, self-funding for 12 months, and he's going to run out of money. Can you help? And to their great credit, they did. But that's not a system for a first world, incredibly wealthy country we shouldn't be in that situation. But now, with this report and all the conversation we've had today, nobody could sit here and not understand why. It's because of the very nature of the disease that it needs a different way forward. And if I wanted to remind people of what we do, I said to the guys in the office, can I have a photo of our wall? It's one of our walls in our patient support team. And I won't go through them all, but pretty much all of them are people who wanted and needed treatments that weren't available in this country. And some of them are still here. Anita is here, and that's fantastic. Some of them are not. This guy right on the bottom, Eric, right-hand side, one up from the bottom. One of the most difficult days of my life was talking to his daughter, and we'd managed to scrape together enough money to give him 2 or 3 loads of treatment of an immunotherapy. He'd gone from a wheelchair. I rang him up, and he was out the back chopping wood. The response was that dramatic, and we couldn't go further, and I just always felt bad. And then I met his daughter a couple of years later, and she walked up and gave me a hug and said, thank you, you gave us an extra 3 years with our dad. And I thought, yeah, but what could have been? And there are all of those stories. And they are the people that our patient support team is extraordinary. They pick up the pieces every day, and we have a philosophy that says, whatever it takes, we're navigators, leaders, supporters, and I'm not going to tell the starfish story again because there couldn't possibly be anyone in this room who hasn't heard it. But they're all great stories, great Australians, great people. So yeah, we've asked for things in this report that I think are incredibly reasonable. I wondered if I should say at the start of this, or while we were all sitting here, that one of the things we didn't ask for was an advisory council, but I gather that wouldn't have gotten well But what do we want? And there's so much that we want, but these are implementable. A coordinated national genomic strategy leveraging existing government commitment to Cancer Australia and Genomics Australia. One of the reports I didn't talk about there was Vision 2030, which was the report that triggered Greg Hunt to ask Cancer Australia to develop an Australian cancer plan. And we know it's going to be released soon because everybody tells us it's going to be released soon. Oh, I'm so tempted. But Ariane's here and I'm not going there. But all people with cancer have access to comprehensive, cost-effective genomic profiling. And we can't be, at the moment we'd take that for one genomic profile. But we all know, if we study this stuff, that cancer, the genius of cancer is that it evolves while you're treating it. It gets smarter. That's why one test is not enough. We need the capacity to test, retest, to guide, to help navigate the oncologist through the treatment paradigm. I'm looking at David. He's nodding. I'm doing all right. But it's the genius of the disease that we have to be, and this is our way of unraveling it. We've got to ensure people have access to targeted therapies, immunotherapies, cell and gene therapies. And if I had a pen at the moment and I wouldn't get sued, I would underline combination therapies about 45 times. In the case study in which we're talking about, one of the case studies in the report, where we talk about, again, and I'm not giving him a free ride, but pembrolizumab is currently in 5,500 clinical trials in combination with other therapies. There are 20s of thousands and we don't have a mechanism in this country to get that reimbursed. In fact, if the head of Richard Tewes here from Novartis, if he sat down and wanted to have a conversation with Prashant from MSD about putting together a combined application, they can be charged with collusion. It's that big a barrier. We have to do better with it. We can't lose. We did a great deal of work around making sure that we had research funding that was approaching some level of equitable content. We can't let that slip away. And I fear that, the MRFF, the research funding space is competitive. What David's created with Omico, where we found a different way of funding it, is genius. But we have to also acknowledge that had he not done so, we would be winding it down now. There was and that would be instead of screening 25,000 patients, he'd be cleaning out his desk. At the moment, I have sat in rooms where people have talked about putting applications in to the PBS, and they have had to debate whether it is pragmatic and reasonable for them to try to do it for a targeted population and whether that will ever succeed, or whether they would be better to do it for a whole of population, given that it might help get the drug approved and funded in this country. And the consequences of that are profound. If there is, the one thing that cancer patients don't have is time. So if we have a system that potentially puts them in a situation of being treated with a drug that won't work, it takes time. Forget about the fact that it costs the government money. It just takes patient time. And we should be doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that whenever a treatment is prescribed, that it's got its best and most optimum chance of success. And we need to get that right. So combination therapies is my big passion. I am a failed actuary. Feels good to say that, I've got to tell you. But when I look at the AIHW data and I see lung cancer as 2 categories and other cancers as 1, it's just not acceptable. We have to be able to look at these, break them down by molecular subtype, get real data, come up with real solutions, because data is everything. And that may come from registries and a revision of registries. There's a whole lot of work to do there, but there is work to be done. And we need so much work. Data can change the way that we reimburse medicines. It can change the way that we assess medicines and value them. It can change the way we run our health system. And we have to do it better than we're doing it right now. You know, and I know it's all forgotten, but we do have our personal healthcare record. What's it called? My health record. See, it just rolls off the tongue. And it's there. We've invested billions. It's potentially the biggest boon in this country. And we should be looking at that, encouraging the AAHW to do more, integrating registries. I'm sorry, John Zolsberg, I think he's online. Hi, John. But the man has a passion and a deep understanding of registries. We have to get them better. We have to know what is happening. And one final thing, and my sign says time's up, but one final thing is that in about 2017, Nick Xenophon spoke to me and we had a conversation and we managed to get the Department of Health at that point to release data, combination data in reasonable amounts for the combination of Medicare and PBS data. And some wise guy managed to identify some patient somewhere and it all got shut down again. We need, by whatever mechanism we can, we need to be able to give proper, reputable analytical companies access to that data so that we can actually see what's going on in the system. It's all there. We know that there is a way of cross-referencing PBS data with Medicare data. They can link it, we can analyse it, and if you think about all of the things that we could then discover, it would be wonderful, and we would know a lot more about the health of this country if we did it. So it's not on my list, but it's there. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.